Hello and welcome to the Middle East. We are at Sakhir Circuit in Bahrain for the first race weekend in an 8-race calendar in Formula 2. And we are ushering in a new era for Formula 2, one in which, Karine Chandok, there are plenty of changes, not least the new format, which we will talk about right now. But hello, first and foremost, how are you?
Yeah, very well. Lovely to be here. A boiling hot day for these guys to go out and do their first free practice session of the season.
It is very different to Formula 1, where it gets much cooler later on. Right now, we are at the height of the heat of the day. Let's have a look then at the calendar, because we know that there are 8 races on it, 5 flyaways and 3 in Europe. How much of a difference will that make to them?
I mean, the format is the biggest change. Obviously, there's less rounds. You know, in the past they used to do 12 rounds. Now they're only doing 8, but they've got 3 races on every weekend, and it's an interesting mix. You've got some of the permanent circuits, of course, like Silverstone and Monza and Abu Dhabi, but then you've also got the street circuits in Jeddah and Baku. So and obviously the biggest one in Monaco. So yeah, they've got an interesting mix to pad out the 8 weekends. I think you know, the fact that it's a wide open season that, you know, we'll talk about, I'm sure, all through the year. I can think of 10 or 11 people who can win the championship. Okay, well, let's dive a bit deeper then into the new format, and it includes 2 sprint races on a Saturday. So first up, we've got practice session today. That's 45 minutes, followed by quali, and that will determine the grid for Sunday's feature race. On Saturday, though, we've got 2 sprint races, and they will be determined by reversing the top 10 finishes in quali from Friday, and the second sprint race will be determined by reversing the top 10 finishes in the first sprint race. And ultimately, this means plenty of overtaking, plenty of excitement, and actually far more points up for grabs, 65 as opposed to 48 last time out. This is a great thing for the championship, isn't it? It's an interesting thing. I think it means qualifying is much less important than it used to be, because for a sprint race you still get 18 points for the win. So actually, you know, even if you qualify 8th, 9th, 10th and therefore have pole for the sprint races and get a good result in those 2, you could get a whole haul of points. So I think certainly in this practice session we're going to see the drivers and teams focus quite a bit more in terms of the long runs and the race setups to make sure, rather than you make sure the car's competitive there, rather than their quali setup, because all of a sudden you've got 2 opportunities with a mixed grid, shall we say, rather than the you know, the main feature race.
And that main feature race will take place on a Sunday under the watchful eye of the rest of the Formula 1 paddock. Great chance to showcase some of their talent. Let's talk through some of the main contenders that will be well, one eye perhaps on the future to making that step up. And you'd have to say the system is working, because we've had 8 graduates from Formula 2 to Formula 1 in the last 4 years, 3 from last year to this year alone. So first up, Robert Schwartzman, he had a great season last time out, perhaps not so consistent. Here was his win, a dominant one in Budapest. How impressed were you with him last year, and what does he need to do this year to keep that momentum up?
He was very strong last year as a rookie. You know, he obviously won that race there, but he had some very good results all through the season. The team were a little bit more inconsistent, but I think it's wide open. You know, you've got the likes of Yuri Vips, you've got Dan Ticktum, you've got Jehan Daruvala, all drivers who've got great pedigree. Marcus Armstrong, another, you know, Ferrari Junior who's in the Formula 2 field this year. Christian Lundgaard was quickest at the test. You know, the names keep coming to my head, because, as I said before, I can think of 10 or 11 people who on every race weekend can be a contender. Well,
Christian Lundgaard will be looking for a very strong season as well. As you say, he got that win in Styria last time out. And I mean, there's actually some graduates coming through from F3, the champion Oscar Piastri, and the youngest winner in Teo Pourchaire, 16 years old. They both made that step up as well.
Yeah, and you know, they both fought for the championship all the way down to the final round. You know, Pourchaire was a very impressive young talent that we saw in Formula 3, and I'd be interested to see in a bigger car. You know, the Formula 2 cars are bigger, much more physical than the F3 cars, so for a young lad like him, that could be a challenge. It depends how hard he's trained over the winter. We'll get to see.
What nugget of advice would you give them at this stage of the season?
Just be consistent. That's the most important thing across the season.
Okay, and probably keep cool as well, because it is a baking here. Okay, let's head up to the commentary box, which has no doubt got some air conditioning. It's Alex Shakes, Billy Munger and Alex Brundle.
Good morning and welcome to the first track action at the opening Grand Prix weekend of 2021. That off-season silence, it is over. It's time to get back racing. It's time for FIA Formula 2. Testing is complete. Your predictions are set. It is time to put a green light at the end of the pit lane and get this championship started. It's 5.4 kilometres, 3.3 miles. But we've raced around Bahrain so much in the last few months, you already knew that. 3 DRS zones and 15 turns, a little bit of elevation, and one very entertaining racetrack. Here's the evidence of that. Schumacher versus Mazepin, teammates now, but rivals on track 1 year ago. Down to turn number 1, high-tech getting past the Prema. Up to turn 4, we're going to see so much overtaking here all weekend long. Armstrong getting past Piquet. And that was a bold move that wasn't resolved. That's the great thing about this circuit, all the way down the hill, and lockups are plenty into turn 10. This one had a huge impact in the championship. Callum Ilott hitting Jan Daruvula, who was our last race winner of the year. In commentary, I'm Alex Jakes. It's great to be back with you for another season. And joining me in the lineup this morning, 2 excellent analysts to guide you through. First of all, it's Happy New Season to Alex Brundle.
Happy New Season to you, Jakesy. I don't think I've ever been more excited about the start of a practice session, but I tell you what, I'm also excited about our new secret weapon in the combox for this weekend.
Oh, how generous was that? It's also Happy New Season to Mr. Billy Munger.
How's it going?
You must be delighted to be giving us all your knowledge about F2 this year.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at the grid this year. I've raced a few of these guys on a few occasions, so I've got a little bit of insight there for you.
Well, it is a really, really interesting season and a brand new format. It is going to be fascinating as we see the cars on the track for the first time. And right now, we're seeing everyone out on the racetrack. We've got so many new drivers in the field, including Beckman going through your picture there, and the other Charus now appearing. That's Samaya, who switched teams. But, as I said, new format. It's going to have a big impact on the F2 weekend. And to talk you through it, let's send it to the boss, Bruno Michel.
Originally, we were thinking last year on the different ways we could try to diminish substantially the costs for the category. One thing that seemed quite obvious to us was that we should try to go to less venues and do more racing. There will be one qualifying session on Friday, and then the qualifying session will decide 2 starting grids. The starting grid of the first race, which is going to be a sprint race, and which will be a reverse of the top 10 qualifiers of the qualifying session, and the starting grid of the Sunday race, who will be the feature race. The difference will be that we will have a second race on Saturday, which will be also a sprint race, and the start of the sprint race, the grid of the sprint race, will be decided on the reverse grid of the top 10 drivers of the race 1.
Strategy could be quite interesting. There's so many different possibilities that we could do and make work. We could favour the first race, for example, on the Saturday, and almost forget about the second race in a way, or we could do the opposite.
Previously, if you had a bad race 1, you would basically have a bad weekend because you won't really be able to recover in race 2. As a sprint race, and now we start out with 2 sprint races.
It sounds a little bit complicated as explained like that, but actually it's something that is quite simple and that will be very, very easy to understand for everybody once we've started.
Well, congratulations to Bruno Michel for keeping that explanation down under the 40 minutes we've got left. It is a brave new world for F2. Alex Brundle, what do you make of FIA Formula 2's new format?
It's eventually easy to understand for everybody. I took a little bit of a look at it. Basically, you've got a standard race weekend, haven't you, that kind of hops over the middle day, over that Saturday, and then we kind of riff off qualifying all the way through the Saturday using the reverse top 10 for the starting grid of the first one, and then rolling into the second race. It's a very interesting format. Drivers having various ideas about how well it's going to go. Guan Yu Zhou making a comment in the off-season, he didn't know whether it would be better to qualify 10th or 1st for this first race. I know for a fact you don't want to be the guy who qualifies 11th.
Yeah, absolutely. It is looking at Marcus Armstrong, another driver switching teams, part of the Ferrari Driver Academy. Ferrari have Robert Schwartzman, Marcus Armstrong in their stable, and of course they've advanced Mick Schumacher to Formula One. The easiest way to make sure that you're on top of the format, of course, is qualifying yourself at the front and converting them into victory. The reason that we have the sprint races and the feature race in FIA Formula 2 is so that if you are the fastest driver, you also have to show your overtaking skill as well. It's not just plonk it on pole and drive into the distance.
And it gives the drivers, for example, Yuki Tsunoda, who now, of course, becomes the youngest driver, the only driver born in the 21st century. Wow, that'll make you feel old. To jump into a Formula One car, the opportunity to have a standard race weekend and, you know, throw it at the front. But like you say, Jake, see, racecraft all important, especially here in Bahrain with those 3 DRS zones and all of the great racing action we've seen over the years.
Checking in with the Campos team for the first time on track, the first F2 round to take place since the passing of the team's founder, Adrian Campos. He raced for Minardi in Formula One in 1987, and then as a team owner progressed so many talented drivers up the motor racing ladder. There are so many in motorsport who owe Adrian Campos, and I think it's a great legacy, a great example of what he did for motorsport. Gianluca Petikov, a driver who doesn't have the biggest budget. He's been advanced to that team this year, and he's alongside Ralph Boschung, who has grafted time and time again, getting sponsorship any way he can to return to the Grand Prix weekend. It's a fitting lineup and a wonderful tribute to someone who had a huge impact on motorsport.
Another grafter on screen now. I think he's had his bumps in the road, but Dan Ticktum returns to Carlin, the 2017-2018 Macau Grand Prix winner. I know a lot of people are very excited how he's going to get on in that Carlin team across from Johan Daruvala returning for this season. There's Petikov, the 2020 Formula Regional European champion, taking 4 wins and 14 podiums. Let's see how he gets on in his rookie season in Formula 2.
Has Alex Brundle done his homework? Yes, he has. Ticking all those boxes, my friend. So, 45 minutes of the only practice session that they get. Formula One, of course, having reduced practice this year, but this has always been the way for what was GP2, now is Formula 2. We heard Alex mentioning Dan Ticktum, used to be part of the Red Bull program. Red Bull have drivers in the mix. There are 3 cars in Red Bull livery, including Yuri Vips. And Billy, Yuri Vips, potentially the driver most affected by the pandemic, because he was in line for that seat. He was probably furthest progressed along the motorsport ladder before the pandemic hit, wasn't able to race in Japan as he intended, and Yuki Tsunoda goes and put together a Yuki Tsunoda season. He's been jumped.
Yeah, he really did get jumped by Yuki Tsunoda, and it's mad to me to think that I raced Yuki Tsunoda back in 2019, and now he's set on the grid of in F1 with AlphaTauri. And I mean, if you're Yuri Vips, you'll be gutted. I mean, not racing at all in 2020, really, apart from his odd guest appearance in F2. He'll be disappointed, like you say, to be leapfrogged and to not have that opportunity that Yuki's got. But that gives him all the more incentive to really push things this year and try and take a championship title and go for it.
Every single time we move to another driver in the pit lane, I think Alex Brundle, could be an outside bet for the title. We're going to have a phenomenal driver this year finishing 10th in the championship, aren't we? That is the reality of the strength in this field.
Certainly are. On screen momentarily there, another phenomenal driver. Had a bit of a turbulent run-in at the end of last year in Formula 2, but what a performance he put in Formula 3. Talking, of course, about the youngest driver on the field, Théo Pourchaire. And he is just such a vivacious, aggressive character behind the wheel. And I love the way he pushes a race car, very much at home in that ART setup. And moving through to the Premier Feeder Series category, as we see Ralph Boschung make his way through turn 13. Tricky circuit in a Formula 2 car this, but they've done plenty of laps now.
Yeah, they should know this place inside out by this point. Of course, we had the outer loop, but we've also had the test here, just like Formula 1, held at this venue, as well as the rounds at the end of last year, with a couple of races around the traditional circuit, and then the final round on the outer loop this year. And it'd be great to see the outer loop back. We're all excited with the start of the season. I need to run you through the basics. The track temperature is 48 degrees. The air temperature, a glorious 32. The compound for this weekend, the hard and the soft. And more races, 3 for the price of 2, means more tyres available. We're up from the 4 sets to the 5. The extra set they get, the set they're running right now, the white-walled hard tyre.
And that is a set to reflect the extra sprint race, of course. Going to be so important this year, those sprint races, as Alessio De Leda punishes the right front of that car. They're going to be so important to take those tyres all the way through. There is no room for error because they're super tight on that prime compound all the way through this year. Every single point's going to matter, of course. Less points available also over the season. If you imagine it, last year every second race was a feature race, whereas this year every third race is. So every single point for these drivers is going to matter. And a man who'll know that more than anybody else, Guan Yu Zhou, returning with UNI Virtuosi, a team where he's really made his home over the last few seasons.
Yeah, last year didn't get off to the easiest start and never really seemed to recover the momentum. Brilliant recovery drives time and time again, but it just didn't quite work for Guan Yu Zhou on the 18-inch rims, which totally changed how the rubber worked. And I caught up with him at the Alpine Academy launch, and he said, well, he mentioned the start of the season. That's a painful memory. It took him a long time to come back and get up to speed, but he's going to be another driver that we're going to throw in the mix as a potential championship contender, because that's what people expected of him last year.
He was a bit of a rocket in the middle of the races, but struggled a little on qualifying day, Guan Yu Zhou. We just expect from him year after year, and he delivers, but he's been the subject of so much misfortune over the various races, especially through last year. Clearly a talent, clearly a prospect, and the 2021 Asian F3 champion over the winter as well. So let's see how he gets on this year in another year with Virtuosi.
Yeah, it was running with the Prema team. Billy, from your point of view, can you understand that the drivers, having had that season packed in from July to December, then want to go and do more racing over the winter as well? If you could race every week, would you be racing every week?
I think every driver loves this sport and wants to be out in a race car of some sort every weekend. So, especially guys like Dan, I know I've raced him since he was a kid, and I know how passionate he is. It's just about driving, how much he just loves getting out behind the wheel of a car. And I think him and Carlin, again, we're talking about title contenders. There's another one right for you there. I think Dan's worked with the team on previous occasions before, and I think he'll have a good relationship with them. I think he's built that over the winter. Now,
you've raced with this team before. Give us an idea, give everyone at home an idea of what that team is like.
Carlin is a real family team, and I think sometimes you lose that when you get to the higher ranks in motorsport. It becomes quite serious, and I think at the heart of what Carlin do, they're just passionate about what they do. I mean, I experienced that firsthand from how open they were to even trying to bring me back into behind the wheel of a race car, and I experienced that firsthand and how passionate they were, and the extra hours they put in that project for me, that they really didn't have to. I mean, I remember a lot of late nights in the workshop, me and the boys having some pizzas. So yeah, they can put in the hard work when they need to, for sure.
And Richard Verschoor getting close to the car in front, but that is an MP Motorsport car. They've ditched there, almost seems wrong, but they're running not in orange, but in blue. But apparently there's some cheap blue paint going round, because I tell you what, it's half the grid this year in a form of navy or blue. Not that I'm worried about lap 1 at all, not in any way. It'll be fine.
Notmyproblem.com is the website you need to be visiting for that, Mr. James. I can only mirror what you say about Carlin, Billy. They're such a great team to be involved with, and watching them get you back behind the wheel was truly inspiring, as was your charity work earlier on this year, mate. Motorsport salutes you for that one. Thanks for throwing us all out there in such a brilliant light. And we see Richard Verschoor locking up that left front tyre.
So out of turn 9 into turn 10, we're going to see this all the way through the weekend. Why is it so common down there?
Just because of the track falls away on the apex. Cars, to deliver the downforce to the road, are very stiff across the front. And unlike in Formula 1, where you have a lot of brake bars availability in terms of changes, it's a little harder in a Formula 2 car. So getting the brake bars to the rear here on the racetrack between turn number 8 and turn number 9 is very, very tricky. There it is. You load up the right front, that unloads the left front, and you can see just the tendency to under-rotate as Dan Ticktum heads down into turn number 10. Really a tricky zone of the racetrack to not flat spot the front left.
So we've had Boschung, Petakov, Nannini, Deleda, Drugovic, and then the driver that you're on board with, but this is set to be the fastest time of the day. How you look after the white walled hard tyre is going to define what sort of weekend you have. Drivers were struggling with it, saying it was a different compound construction to previous years. So all the knowledge that you've built up at the previous races, well, that's gone away. And for someone like Drugovic, who was so good on this tyre last year, he didn't want it changed at all. He wanted it left how it was before. Dan Ticktum on that tyre, trying to set the fastest time of the day so far. Going nicely in the first sector, personal best in the second sector, and heading to the top of the time page in front of me with a 1:45.5. And that is now the time to beat as we check in at the pit wall with the team that we were talking to you about a few moments ago. And Dan Ticktum will be alongside Jan Daruvala, our most recent race winner, but different livery. So we're just getting you up to speed and the idiosyncrasies of the season. There in the Dams livery that thankfully has remained the same for the last couple of years. Marcus Armstrong, a driver trying to bounce back from a really difficult season. The runner-up to Robert Schwartzman a couple of years ago in Formula 3. And now the Kiwi trying to re-establish himself. Huge talent, started the season well, was on the podium, and then it fell away.
So he did. He looked like he was going to be in contention, didn't he, all the way through that season, Armstrong. Coming across the line, though, to deliver a nice lap. Track's quick, JT. A good lap in the middle of last year's sprint race would be a 45, a mid-45, just like that. So this early in the weekend, it's impressive to see them delivering that kind of lap time. And here we go, Oscar Piastri squirreling his Prema into the first corner. Goodness me, that was a lock-up and a half.
It's super bumpy down there at turn 1. Also, I'm thinking, Brundle, if you run a race event of some form or a test almost every day from November, the track is going to get pretty grippy, isn't it?
I can see that you're an expert, mate. You got it nailed. You got it nailed. And yeah, certainly there's been plenty of track action here and plenty of Formula 1 rubber going down as well with all of the testing that's been going on. Oscar Piastri backing it in, which is okay as long as you don't back it out, in my experience.
Come on, mate, let's keep the nonsense that we're in the opening minutes of the season. We've got to go all the way to December. Time to run you through the calendar. It's going to be a really interesting calendar all the way through this year. We've got some returning races. Fantastic to go back to Monaco and then on to Baku. Always a PlayStation circuit every single time the Formula 2 visits. Then we've got Silverstone, Monza, a trip to Sochi, and then a new circuit, a curveball, just like we had at the end of last season, a curveball thrown in there in the form of the new street circuit at Jeddah, and we finish the campaign at Yas Marina Circuit. New second fastest time on the board for Liam Lawson, who remains with the high-tech team. Alex, what do you make of that calendar?
That calendar is a serious curveball, I think, especially Jeddah, which is going to really challenge these drivers. If that circuit looks hard and tricky and fast in a Formula 1 car, in a Formula 2 car with nowhere near the ride height control, nowhere near the downforce and nowhere near the refinement, it's going to be so difficult to get a good lap out of the cars around while they're trying to learn that circuit, of course, in this session, in the 45-minute practice session early on in the weekend.
Billy, where catches your eye on that calendar that I just ran through?
I mean, there's definitely a bit of intrigue with that new circuit, and that's going to really test the drivers, especially it being a street circuit by nature. That's going to throw some curveballs in there for sure. And it looks like we've got another lock-up into turn 1 from David Beckman now. I mean, it seems to be quite common, but it's always sort of a practice thing where you've got to push the boundaries and find out what's possible.
Yeah, David Beckman saying the braking was the thing that he specifically struggled with, making that step up from Formula 3 to Formula 2. He said that the braking was the most impressive thing, and he made a huge step from the post-season test to the pre-season test. But as we've seen already so far in the opening session of the season, it is very bumpy down there at turn number 1. Dan Ticktum's improved his time further, whilst we are looking at really the breakout star of last year, the driver that surprised a few, It went very well in the Euro Formula Open when he took the title, didn't go so well in Formula 3, bounced back, and was a winner from very early on. Felipe Drugovich stepping up to UNI Virtuosi and trying to step up and continue that winning run. He's going to come over the line now. And he goes fastest. For a team that has gone so well here in the previous few years, on pole by a mammoth 0.4 of a second in the hands of Callum Ilott last year. UNI Virtuosi at the top of the time page once again.
Was a monster lap from Ilott last year. Drivers continuing to improve on this hard tyre gives you a bit of a feel for how the new construction might be working out. Slightly more durable, perhaps, like the move in Formula 1. Beckman, interesting comments. Nobuharu Matsushita's engineer ran me just a couple of weeks ago in a prototype and said that the really difficult thing for the drivers, well, there were two elements. Firstly, the bumps with these larger rim size, it changes the springness of the spring of the tyre, the spring rate of the tyre, and the way that the car feels over the bumps in the braking zones. It's a huge thing. He also reiterated just how physical a Formula 2 car is now, with all of that weight at the end of the steering arm to move around for the driver.
That is something that they, as you point out, Alex, everyone has been remarking about. All of those who have stepped up from Formula 3 to Formula 2, like the driver you're watching, he did that last year, the highest placed driver in the championship who's returning. He beat a driver who is now in Formula 1 to the championship standings, Robert Schwartzman there, who went over the line with the 5th fastest time. As we check in further down the order, that's not Teo Porcher, that is Teo Porcher, one of the Tridents beforehand. I believe it was Marino Sato, but it's early in the season, don't hold me to that. The Sauber Academy driver, yes, Sauber do have an academy, and he is the sole representative. Very, very close to stealing the title away from Oscar Piastri. 2 points away in the end, and a huge hope for French motorsport. Current driver to beat is Felipe Drugovich. Brazil have been looking for a star for a while now. Can he be the driver to get back to Formula 1 and to carry the flag? At the moment he's starting the season, how he basically looked a lot last year. Very, very impressive. And of course, he was very strong when battling Callum Ilott 1 year ago.
Was absolutely on it through last year, put in some amazing performances throughout the races, and has a really big following, Felipe Drugovich, in his home country. And only one of his 3 wins from last year came from a feature race, so he'll be loving this sprint race format. He loves it mixed up. He's a big battler, isn't it, Drugovich? Zendelli?
Yeah, he is indeed. He is indeed. There's Zendelli just hanging on to it on the outside of turn 4. Amid all the confusion with all the blue cars, Lorim Zendelli has done his best to differentiate himself. He's got that Iron Man crash helmet. There's no doubt that is the German driver there. And someone who just got up to speed and improved more and more. Had a breakthrough victory last year with the Trident team. Now plying his trade with MP Motorsport. And another lock-up, this time off the road in the background there. That's reaching for short, so his teammate off the road in the background as he continues using the DRS in one of the 3 zones available to him.
Could be a tough year for MP actually, with those 2 rookies both contending for the team. There's that lock up and a little bit wide into the DRS zone down the back straight towards turn 11, as you say, Jakesy. But does help, and I know that teams make financial concessions to drivers who have spent years and years in the series, because although, yes, continuously changing the tyre compound, less so the car this year, but everything always moving forward, that experience at this level is worth so much, not just to the own driver for their own performance, but also across the garage to their teammate.
Absolutely. Robert Schwartzman basically had it all parked up, didn't he, on the apex of turn 10?
Yeah, I'm not too sure what was going on there. He had a bit of a lock-up where he was trying to slow the car down to the inside to let someone past, which he did, and then he was obviously parked on the apex, and someone came up behind him pretty quick, so he had to get out of the way, and he's now in the pits. Something didn't look quite right there.
So Liam Lawson staying with his team. that he was a multiple race winner. His title challenge basically undone by a consecutive run of 3 retirements at basically the start of the year, and he was always playing catch up. But Liam Lawson was formidable with the high-tech team last year. You see him with that outfit in Formula 2. They're both Red Bull livery cars. Yuri Vips, his teammate, and that is a strong, I think that's a really strong driver lineup, but then I think you could apply that to most teams in the field. Real advantage staying with the team, Billy, that he was with in Formula 3, because there's just a familiarity about it.
Yeah, 100%. And whenever you're coming through the ranks, you always want to pick a team that you can progress with and learn with each other. So that relationship between the driver and the engineer is so important, and Liam's going to have that experience of working with high-tech, how they work things out. And that's all been sort of something he's put into practice last year, and it's really important for him this season.
Here's Guan Yu Zhou. Told you it was bumpy down at turn number 1. And there's another example of it. Lock up to send him slightly wide. Currently 12th fastest with his teammate top of the page. Proudly displaying the colours of the Alpine Academy. And he knows that this is the year to deliver, but he got that breakthrough win, didn't he, in Russia last year, and he said that was a weight off his shoulders. It's a weight he had been carrying since his very first race. That is what they all aspire to, and maybe from the outside, Alex, it always sounds a bit daft when someone's like, oh, you get your first win. These drivers have been winning, otherwise they wouldn't be in Formula 2, but it does seem to change something psychologically for a driver.
It certainly does, and you have to prove it to yourself continuously that you're there at the level you're racing at, and that you can compete. Because so many, with drivers staying on over years and years of Formula 2, drivers like Guan Yu Zhou, Dan Ticktum, they become big names for the young drivers moving through. And actually, it can be quite daunting when you move up to a new category against what feels like a grid of superstars, not least when you move eventually into Formula 1. But drivers who can overcome that feeling and just deliver on the racetrack, especially those drivers that deliver in their early years of Formula 2 participation, really stand out then when they make the next step into Formula 1.
17 minutes to go in the session. It's Felipe Drugovich ahead of Dan Ticktum. Then it's Liam Lawson. And then we've got Marcus Armstrong ahead of Robert Schwartzman, Larim Zendelli, Yuri Vips, completing the top 10. Taruvala, Viscal, Piastri. Then it's Porcher, Joe Lundgaard, Nissani, Vashore, Beckman, Samaya, Petskov. And then Sato, Boschong, Nannini and Deleda, 21st and 22nd. As David Beckman once again tests out those brakes on his Charus racing system, which I always enjoy the name of that team.
Lock-up cam continues.
It does. We're running through as much as possible. And our early thanks to the personnel bringing us the fantastic pictures, the sound, the graphics. Huge amount of effort goes into bringing you this fantastic presentation, and it's going to be a great season to enjoy. Early encouraging signs for Marcus Armstrong. He said he couldn't believe the difference that a car, remember, they're all identical. These Lara chassis, all identical tyres. The difference is made by the 12 personnel who work on the car, and he could not believe the difference in feeling from that ART to the dams.
Setup is absolutely everything, though, and there are several critical elements on a Formula 2 car: the rake, the ride height, and of course the setup of the front and rear wing. It can just revolutionise the way the car feels from behind the wheel. Everything magnified, of course, at speed in a race car. You just feel every tiny little change in the car so large in your fingertips and through your backside. As Petikov finds his way down into turn number 1. Those small changes when you're loaded up in a high G corner like turn 12 here in Bahrain, or indeed indeed through the middle sector, can feel very, very large indeed. Petikov impeded slightly there on the exit of turn number 2.
Yeah, one of 6 teenagers in the field, and one of 3 Brazilians as well. So great to have him in the championship. Incredible strength and depth in the talent this year. And it's just a learning experience for the rookies as they just try. But with the new format, there's opportunities. There's going to be tactics towards the end of those races. But to let you know, the format has not changed on a Friday. Half an hour of qualifying coming your way in about 2.5 hours after we finish this only practice session, and that is half an hour, unlimited laps, but unlimited tyres. So usually the 2 runs for the field around this 5.4 kilometre circuit, where the track temperature will be lower and the tyres will be softer.
Tyres will be softer. The soft compound even on all of the cars over 2 runs. They'll use both sets of soft tyres, I would imagine almost all of the field, unless anybody tries to do anything very clever strategically with the tyres available. Add more tyres, of course, you add more potential holes in the regulations. We have seen drivers here make pit stops in sprint races, not least an incredible performance from Charles Leclerc just a few years ago. Potentially more options to do that with more sprint races this weekend.
Yeah, Charles Leclerc with the famous one, but F2 aficionados will know as well that Luca Giotto did exactly the same thing. So on his way to victory, so that has been occasionally the right way to go. Not what you would normally see, although we did see pit stops in the sprint race in Budapest as well, as that was rather close between an HWA and a Campos. And this is Dan Ticktum, who looked up to speed in testing and has looked comfortable. Even though he's had that lock-up, he's got the second fastest time, and he is only a 10th away from Felipe Drugovich, whose only feature race victory came at this very circuit when he beat Callum Ilott to the win 1 year ago. And I tell you what, when Drugovich gets his eye in, his wins were not contests last year. When he's happy, he's gone.
No, he just disappears into the distance, doesn't he? It's the mark of a driver whose race pace is really under control. Did put the qualifying performances in as well, but when asked to pick a favourite or to pick somebody who really I was excited to watch this year, not necessarily a favourite, because mate, we've got a grid full of favourites, let's be honest. Drugovich is somebody who stood out last year in certain moments by just putting in, as you say, those check-out performances all the way through the year. And he's got some stiff competition, not least from some incredible rookies coming through from Formula 3 and elsewhere.
I have to say, I've never ever known a Formula 2 practice session where I'm trying to rack my brain to go through, have we spoken about everyone who's a contender? Because normally there are 5 clear contenders, but I'm looking at this order on the left-hand side, and I'm thinking, well, we've got to highlight so much here. We've barely even spoken about the Formula 3 champion, Oscar Piastri, coming up with the same team that he won the title. He's got a great teammate with Robert Schwartzman, and as if by magic, the gallery have found our Australian driver. Part of the Alpine Academy, won the title by 2 points last year. He is mentored by Mark Webber, and he's spoken about how that relationship isn't always hand-holding. You've got to be given the freedom to learn and discover. But he will know, he will have seen that drivers who do well in Formula 3 and immediately do well in Formula 2, well, it usually means you've got a great chance of heading to Formula 1.
Yeah, it's Oscar's in a great position, like you say, continuing with the team, and I know from personally working with Mark over the course of an F1 weekend, he's always got the F3 races on and watching Oscar, his man, and sort of keeping an eye on his progress, and he runs really through the highs and lows with Oscar, and I think he really follows his career, and having someone like Mark in your corner is always going to help. So Oscar's got to use that experience, and the experience he's got with Prema, to the best effect he can this season.
A guy looking for his 3rd championship in as many years, and staying with Prema, who won everything last year there was to win in terms of teams and drivers championships. So it's a brilliant place to be for Oscar Piastri, and I'm sure he will be looking to deliver the way he has delivered over the past several seasons. Formula 2 is a different animal again, though, and he's got a serious teammate across the garage from him in the shape of Robert Schwartzman, the winningest driver from last season, and number 1 on the front of his race car. Sitting in P5 at the moment, Robert Schwartzman, with a decent effort earlier on in the session. And now we're just pounding through some race runs. I can't wait to see these runs come out, actually, to look at the degradation of this hard compound tyre, see how that is going to progress through the session. Things like that.
So you like spend a Friday afternoon, isn't it?
I degrade tyres.
Poring over reams of data, endless pages.
And we've got it to play with, and I'm looking forward to it all year long. Sorry, I apologise in advance.
You make a good point. It is going to be crucial. How they handle this hard tyre, how the car is with fuel. No refuelling, of course. So how the car is with fuel going to be so important. Their task today, low fuel, soft tyres. Their task for tomorrow, heavy fuel, 45 minutes, burn it off, don't take too much out of the tyres. And for the rookies, a big task. But as we saw last year, not simple for anyone. Another new driver in the field, Ben Viscal, winner of the best Formula 3 race last year. Drag race to the line at Silverstone, no less. Oh, how I wish we had fans on the bank for that moment. He is a driver who signed up for just the one round, hoping to make it the full season. But that's just how he started last year. And then he did eventually get the full season with MD Motorsport, deserved promotion up to Formula 2. Excited to see whether he can turn that occasional pace into something more consistent.
First on the road in race 2 at Hungaroring, of course, getting a penalty eventually in that race, but also won that one on the racetrack. And certainly a young man who has to fight to keep a seat and then to perform in that seat, and has given some impressive performances as the 2018 Euro Formula Open runner-up, Ben Viscal. And a new rookie in the series. Here is a man who is not a rookie in the series. Christian Lundgaard makes his way, continuing with ART through turn number 10, sitting in 13th place at the moment. We'll be looking for a little bit more pace than that later on this afternoon, Christian Lundgaard. But you never know quite what the drivers are doing in terms of fuel. Not allowed to refuel, of course, in the pit lane. So drivers have to make a judgment on how much they want to run versus how close they want to get to a qualifying simulation at the start of the session.
Returning to the road, Christian Lundgaard talking about the consistency, having the same team personnel around him, Billy, and that consistency of knowing everyone's name, knowing how he has to give them the information. That's so important and a massive advantage being in your second year.
Especially for him, like you say, being in his second year. The start of the season, it's really important for someone like Christian to hit the ground running, I think, because those rookies, there's a lot of fast rookies on the grid. A lot of people were already talking about being title contenders and they're new to F2. So that just shows the level of the grid we've got. So they're going to need to, people like Lundgaard are going to need to really make the most of the first few rounds of the season, while everyone may be still learning a few tricks of the trade and getting up to speed. And he doesn't want to be doing too much of that this weekend.
Wide at turn 13, going to see plenty of that as he took early evasive action of Robert Schwartzman, who was the car in the way. And I feel like I've been commentating on Christian Lundgaard for ages, in the best way possible. And he's 19. He's just 19 years of age. And I think it's worth underlining, and I really want to underline this at the start of the year. This is some of the best entertainment you will see in motorsport, but these drivers are not the finished article. The point is that they progress. The point is that they add skill set, that they work with their engineers, that they extract more performance. So we're going to be kind to them. We're going to be forgiving in the com box, because they're learning, they're growing as they go, and they are looking to reach the pinnacle. So they're going to have that hard steely edge in the end. But Charles Leclerc, who was spectacular winning that sprint race in 2017, brilliant indication of the talent that was to come, but he wasn't the finished article, and that's one of the best things about F2. You're going to see that journey as the season progresses.
Certainly are, and we're in these young drivers' corner in terms of watching their progression and getting behind them. Another man who definitely made progression, not only in the way that he drives the car, but also out of the car, I think, Dan Ticktum. Second fastest in this session so far. And he's got a real chance here, Ticktum, to build something with Carlin. You know, a full season seat to put something together. It's, I'm presuming, as is customary, this will be a lock-up down into turn number 10. And that one is a little bit ruder, isn't it? Enter flat spot, stage right.
Leaving a mark, and these hard tyres that they are running all the way through the session. You saw plenty of graining early on when they returned to the pits, but that graining can clear up, and that can be a phase of the tyre. It's interesting to see what they look like in the pit lane in about 4 minutes' time. And they're all smiles down there at Carlin, despite the lock-up as we return to Guan Yu Zhou. At the 14th corner, the 15th and final corner on the racetrack, bit of a nothing, but it can go wrong if you use too much on the outside curb. And we'll have no pace laps now. This is just all data gathering at this stage of the session.
All corners are equal. Some corners are more equal than others, though. Cops is especially equal, in my opinion, as is Eau Rouge, but 15 is a bit of a nothing, as you say. The tricky one here is turn 2 on this race progression, as the rear tyre starts to go away from the driver and they have to jockey the rear end of the car through the second part of the first complex. Joe just gathering. Looks like we've got about 3 or 4 seconds worth of tyre degradation to this point, and they've done about 12 or 13 laps, most of them, so they're about halfway through a race distance. It's going to be a
23 laps for race 1, 23 laps for race 2, 32 laps for the feature race. Reminder that the qualifying session coming your way, half an hour. That's going to set the grid for race 1 and race 3 of this weekend. If you weren't with us at the start of the session, Saturday Sprint Race 1, reversing the top 10 finishers of our Friday qualifying session and setting the grid exactly how they qualify for Sunday's feature race. The feature race with the mandatory pit stop now on a Sunday. You are allowed to make a pit stop in the sprint race. There's no rule to stop you, and it's quite likely around here, because of what Alex was just talking about, the fact that we usually get a difference in old tyre and new tyre of about 5 seconds, and there's already a vibration on the front left for Guan Yu Zhou.
Full vibration struggle for Guan Yu Zhou after lock-up earlier on in the session, and that's what you deal with all the way through. That tyre locks up again and again and again, which everybody knows. The other thing which befalls you when you've locked a tyre up like that, especially if it's one that's been loaded heavily time and time again in a right-hand circuit like this one, for example, if you lock up the left front, is it doesn't perform laterally as well as it did before, and you start to wear it more aggressively. To be avoided at all costs, those bigger lockups, like that.
Like that one, right on cue.
For Felipe Drogovic, who we were just talking about his brilliance earlier on, but yeah, a little bit of a lockup down into turn number 10. DRS wide open down into turn number 11. Got to clear the brake.
And as we hit the 2-minute warning, Billy, just give us an idea of how the drivers are going to minimise that tyre wear. What are you going to do behind the wheel as a driver to stop your rubber running out?
It's all about smooth inputs and just being gentle with the car. You've got to treat the car nicely through these practice sessions so that she's still got a bit left in the tank when you get to the back end of the races where the tyres are really running out of grip. And yeah, just smooth inputs, no lockups if possible, but I mean, as much as you don't want to push the car too far, you also need to find the limit. So it's a balancing act as a driver. You need to push yourself, because otherwise you're not going to find out what's possible in terms of lap time performance, but managing that all through the weekend, that'll be crucial.
That is what they are aiming for, the 22 talented drivers in the field. We are into final minute of the only practice session available. We're going on board with Dan Ticktum at turn 9, which becomes 10, and would you believe it, there's a lock-up. There's about 50 of them in this session. It happens in practice. It will happen in qualifying, can have a big impact on qualifying. And in the race, well, that's very interesting as well. Interesting that Felipe Drogovic lapping 3 seconds off his benchmark time. Direct comparison between pace lap and the degradation. I actually think that 3 seconds away at this the number of laps that he's run, I think they'll be quite happy with that at UNI Virtuosi.
It's notoriously abrasive, this circuit, so expect big numbers in terms of the degradation away from the peak lap. Yes, you've got fuel running down the whole time, that helps. It depends on how much fuel you started out with, because the fuel effect is not exactly linear as the fuel runs down, but indeed, it's all about keeping those tyres underneath you. There's a technique to it, as Billy says, behind the steering wheel, but also a technique from within the engineering group. And they have to make sure that the car is there to allow the driver to look after those contact patches and not damage the rubber. Those soft tyres, if they lock them up in qualifying, they are going to relive it all the way through one of the race performances as the checkered flag is out.
It is indeed, and that, in the blink of an eye, is the opening practice session for FIA Formula 2 in 2021. The off-season has not felt very long at all, and yet, in other ways, it's great to be back. It's brilliant. I tell you what, I used to do practice sessions on my own, and now I've got all this driving expertise left and right of me. Fantastic. Felipe Drugovich, the fastest driver over the line. You're looking at him, the Brazilian driver, top of the timing page. 1:45.3, 16 laps on the board. UNI Virtuosi, being quick in previous years. The man who runs the show there, just adjusting his glasses, Andy Roche. And then looking down the line, there's Trevor Carlin, who's hoping that he can have another season like the one he just had with Jehan Daruvala and Yuki Tsunoda back in 2020, where both drivers were race winners. Good session, bad session. Who's impressed? Who has been disappointing for you, Alex?
I think interesting session. We've got 5 different teams in the top 5 places. Prema haven't jumped right to the front, as we've seen over weekends throughout last year. Drugovich and Tictum, it's clearly going to be a good battle at the front, if indeed they're not carrying too little fuel at this stage.
Race control have told us that the turn 13 incident involving Christian Lundgaard will be investigated after the session. That's probably a race direction note about where you rejoin, I would imagine. The only thing that I can think of, we have seen drivers penalised in the past for not rejoining the right side of the bollard. Yeah, that's the thrilling commentary you tune in for on the opening day of the season.
So the words "in accordance with safety" are not words I ever use, but they are the words that are required if you want to rejoin the circuit having crossed the white line, Alex.
Top 16. Top 15, rather, covered by under a second. We told you it was going to be competitive. What stands out for you, Billy, at the end of the 45 minutes?
Well, I think Liam Lawson actually in third after a strong season for him in F3. I've raced Liam, I know how quick the guy is, and he's got backing from Rodin Cars this year, so he's got bigger support, Red Bull behind him, and a similar team, or the same team in high tech. So Liam Lawson, for me, I think that's a dark horse that I want to throw out there from the start of the season.
And as they return to the pits, we will take a breath after a rampant session. Everyone getting laps on the board. 19 for Nannini appears to be the most on the board out there, and they've had the 3 days of testing as well around this circuit, which will be very, very useful, especially for the 10 rookies in the field. So as they return to the support race pit lane, we can see that Felipe Drugovich is the fastest driver at the end of practice. Dan Tictum in second, and Liam Lawson, an impressive third on his rookie weekend. Drugovich and Tictum in their second years. Then it's Marcus Armstrong and Robert Schwarzman. And then we have Narim Zendelli, Yuri Vips, Jehan Daruvala, Ben Viscal in the top 10, and his first F2 session, Oscar Piastri, is in 10th. Good start for the reigning F3 champion. Teo Porcher in 11th ahead of Guan Yu Zhou, then Christian Lundgaard, who was off the road at turn 13 and finishes in 13th place. Then it's Roy Nissany, Richard Verschoor